Hi, this is Josh from Manhattan Edit Workshop, coming at you from a heavily air-conditioned room in New Orleans, Louisiana. Oddly, one of the great sandwich stops in the country, as evidenced by this, one of many T-shirts I have from Philly and Atlantic City and New York, and eventually I will get one from Chicago too. I've had the Chicago beef; it does not disappoint. But we're talking about the bear, not about food. And what started out about maybe a show that was about a sandwich shop that's turned into so much more. And not only has great food, but it has great characters and great plotting and, of course, great editing. And that's what we're going to talk about here tonight. So I will get to it. I'm going to introduce to you our panelists. Well, I won't introduce. I'll let Chad do that. But we're here tonight for Sight, Sound, and Story Behind the Edit of The Bear with Joanna Naugle, Adam Epstein, and Megan Mancini, with our moderator and pal, Chad Anderson. It's going to be a great conversation, and I can't wait to stop talking and let you get to it. I'm going to thank our sponsors, AJA, ACE, American Cinema Editors, and Avid, as well as Filmmaker U. And I will always thank, and you'll always have to listen to me thank, Jason Banky and Janet Dalton from Manhattan Edit Workshop. They're the ones behind the scenes making this happen, so give them a shout out in the comments and thank them if you can. Please, if you like what you're seeing, subscribe to our channel. It's right there. There's a big button below the video. And if you're watching this on YouTube. And then, of course, tell us if there's something that you want to see. We are out there looking for cool topics and interesting subjects to talk about. So let us know about it. And without further ado, let's get to Sight, Sound, and Story Behind the Edit of The Bear.
Thank you very much, Josh. Welcome to Sight, Sound, and Story. This is another edition of our post-production series, where we have the privilege to have a conversation with professionals who work in editing for film and television. My name is Chad Anderson, and I am ecstatic to be joined by the Emmy Award-winning team behind FX Television's show The Bear, including Joanna Naugle, Adam Epstein, and assistant editor Megan Mancini. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you guys, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be involved.
Yeah, it's fun to be here. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having us. Big fan.
Yeah, thanks.
So I will admit, when first coming into this show, I was very, I would say, difficult about this show. I had worked in restaurants as a younger person. I had worked with cooks and chefs before. This was not the most exciting sell for me. And then I got hooked. Somehow I watched episode 1 and was angry at a bunch of people, and then watched further episodes and became more entrenched in the lives of these people. When did you realize that this show was going to take off and be successful? Was it immediately right away, or was it something that you had to get through half of a season to really realize that this was something special?
I think straight out of the gate, we knew we had something awesome, but it's just so hard to know if it's going to break through. There's so much great TV that can go unnoticed at times, and it just goes out onto a streaming service, and then some people see it, but you don't have like that word of mouth or excitement. So I think, at the end of season 1, I just remember feeling like, oh, I loved cutting this so much. Like, I hope we get to do it again. And then it wasn't like immediate that I think everybody kind of became, obsessed with the show and Jeremy Allen White. But pretty soon afterwards, a couple of weeks, I think people were talking about it. People were excited about it. And then by the time we were getting back to season 2, it was like, oh, okay, I feel like we had built up this really devoted fan base, which we were thrilled about because, I know we were really proud of the work, and we just wanted to see kind of how it would resonate with everybody else.
I had a friend of my parents who I hadn't talked to in probably 20 years drop me a line. And so once they said, "We love the show," I think they probably called it "We Love Bear." And when that happened, like, oh, well, this is kind of, for whatever reason or for whatever algorithm math has, broken through in a way that you kind of hope for it to happen. But yeah, I don't think it's anything that anyone involved really expected. I think it was just something that we like. Hopefully this will have a cool, small cult following, and we like it. And what else can you ask, for that? So good, really lucky, really.
Once season 2 was released and we came into work the next day, and there were like Reddit feeds of people reviewing the entire series. Like, they had stayed up all night long watching it. That was pretty insane. Wasn't expecting that.
In terms of that, how did you guys get approached to do the bear?
Yeah, so I've known Josh Sr., who started Senior Post since maybe 2012 is when we first met, so a while ago. And I was kind of starting out as a freelance editor and met Josh. And he had just started this post house because he himself was an editor and, had all of these clients and needed extra help. So we got along really well. We decided to start working together. And, throughout the last decade, Senior Post has kind of grown from a company that does mostly commercials and branded content into, a place that makes film and TV and comedy specials and all this stuff. And I love working with Josh. Like I said, I've worked with him forever. Now he's more in the producing side. So he's an EP on The Bear. And so I was lucky because we met Chris Storer when we were working on a show called Rami. And Josh and I worked on all 3 seasons of that. And we just got along with Chris really well. And so when Chris had his own show and his pilot, he approached Josh about producing it and then was like, oh, and I would like Joanna to cut the pilot. So it's really great how it was just like I can connect the dots of if I didn't meet Josh, wouldn't have met Rami, wouldn't have met Chris. And we just all already kind of had the shorthand from working on, comedy specials together, working on Rami's show together, that we kind of knew what each other liked a lot going into the pilot. And it wasn't like we were starting from zero. We were like, okay, we all kind of like the same fast-paced things. Let's make this happen. And Megan and I had known each other since we both went to NYU. So when I needed an AE on the pilot, I reached out to her. And then when the series was greenlit for the rest of the season, we were like, okay, who else would we want to edit this? And Adam was the first person we thought of. And then he came on board. So sorry to steal your guys' answers, but feel free to elaborate more.
No notes.
No, it's just everything perfect. Perfect.
Wow.
There. I feel like you had that written down, polished pretty much exactly like scripted from your biography.
I like the oral history of Senior Post. I've said many a time, and I have talked about how much I love working with Megan and Adam many times too. So it's easy to think back on that.
What I always think about this show is that the opening montages to this show always feel to me like a love letter to Chicago. It is very Chicago centric, and it's almost like the city itself is a separate character in the show. It feels like it's part of, the part of the creation of the show is to establish it in Chicago. I wonder how much content of just random exterior shots of buildings and bridges and street signs of Chicago you have, and how you interweave that into the show.
Yeah, we have a ton of B-roll. They started with the pilot. They're like camera test days or just going out and shooting stuff of Chicago, and we definitely used a lot of that. Season 2, they were able to do a helicopter unit, which was really great. For me, that was just like getting to know Chicago, just flying above it, which was really cool. And yeah, then we organize it by area, by like, we have a ton of train stuff, here's stuff of the lake. And then I guess I'll hand it off to Joanna and Adam about how they want to how they usually weave it into a scene. Or
I feel like if I lived in Chicago or if I was a Chicago native, I feel like this would be the most exciting thing for me to see my own area in there. And I feel like there's a percentage of we have to show Chicago in every episode, like a 4% of Chicago needs to be in there.
I think just, broadly from an overall show kind of the thematic standpoint, location is really important to the characters' psyches and their own personalities. And that's mirrored wherever they are. Obviously, the show takes place primarily in Chicago. So that is kind of the driving force. And also it paints so much of their own energy and their own backstories. But when we leave Chicago, we see other places and that vibe comes across too. But as far as incorporating it, I think a lot of it was, using the pilot and the basis that Joanna set so well, from a textural standpoint, and also not, they're exterior shots for the most part, but it's very rarely that it's, here's an establishing wide of where we are and now we're in the scene. It's much more kind of tonal and trying to, here's some pretty shots, but what is it saying, kind of on an emotional level about where the story is going. So yeah, I think it's a combination of kind of incorporating, texture, location, and then also as much vibe as we can get across to make things feel like they're progressing without it being a traditional, scene out, exterior, establishing shot. Now we're into the next scene. It's just really good stuff to play with.
When you talk about tone in those kind of B-roll shots or those as opposed to the wide establishing shots there, is there something that you're trying to convey more so with different things, whether it be trains or whether it be birds or whether it be, storefronts or whether it be close-ups of people are there? Are there moments that you say, oh, trains equals something?
Yeah, I'd say sometimes we lean into that. Like the show starts with kind of this really long montage of Carmie, and he's selling his jeans to make money, and the beef order comes and it's too little. And we keep kind of cutting back to Chicago during that time. And when I talked to Chris, he was like, I want to start with like a shot of adrenaline. I want this to just be like, we're throwing you into the deep end. Carmie's drowning. So like any of the B-roll reuse, something is always moving. There's either like a snap zoom or a bird flying left to right, or the train is wishing past. So I think, I'm speaking for Adam and Meg as well. I think finding like shots that have that energy when we need it to, or finding shots that are a little bit slower and lonelier. There's some really, really cool B-roll footage we got for season 2 that's like kind of Dutch angle of like the subways at night. And Adam and I saw it and we were just like, holy shit, this is awesome. Like when we first saw it. So I feel like anytime we were trying to show like people who are feeling really alone, or maybe we're being transported somewhere emotionally, like we just found like having these kind of like lonely shots of like the subway going past in a wide, or like the Chicago skyline really still at night, like that evokes so much. And when we choose to use like a sunrise shot too, of like, okay, we're starting a new day, maybe we're feeling like hopeful or optimistic. I think we have so much B-roll, it's great that we can kind of like think about what each of these images is conveying and how that relates to the story of each episode, rather than just being like, oh, this is all we have, I guess we got to keep using the same establishing shot. We really do have a lot of like artistic, I guess, input that we can like inject into the episode from the B-roll.
The Bear, despite what some may say, is not a comedy, and I don't think of it as a comedy. Was it a transition for all of you to come from work that was more comedic? Because I think Rami is more comedic, and I think Saturday Night Live definitely was more comedic. Was it more of a
Depends who you talk
transition
to.
depends on who you talk to, yeah. But content-wise, and Megan, even from your work on doing stuff with Amy Schumer, is there a transition to kind of have a comedic background to come into something that's so tense and dramatic and overwhelming sometimes?
I personally don't think so. I think that's a lot of times people like to, especially in editorial, kind of pigeonhole people into genre. I think one of the things with comedy is you have to understand the truth of a scene, the truth of a moment, why something is funny, and be empathetic in that way as far as, does this land? Why does it land? What in the performance is bringing across this emotion? So I think it's more just about being kind of emotionally aware in what the footage is doing. And I think if you can do that, then it's just kind of, it's transposing what tone are we trying to get across? How are we supporting story with emotion? And then just playing to the truth of that. And also, I think we're all, pretty big, film fans as well. And so one of the things at SNL, for example, we were always jumping genre. So the show was, was comedy, but we would do a horror trailer, and the people that I worked with, we would never want to, be full parody with it. It's like, why does something feel weird? Why does it feel scary? So I think then jumping into something that is, maybe by design more tense and a little more, less wink wink with that. It's just still kind of, focusing on the truth of the scene, and like and the truth of the footage, ideally.
It's interesting because Rami is also a comedy, but like in a way that's also a little bit unexpected, in that the themes of the show are like religion and like morality and kind of generational trauma at times. So I feel like it does a good job of kind of walking that line between dramatic moments and comedic moments. And I agree, the Bear walks that line maybe more than Rami does, but I feel like a lot of the humor from the Bear just comes from like knowing the characters so well. So I feel like we always kind of approach the show with an idea of like, we're not doing like set up punchline comedy, but like also just making sure we make room for like Richie to say something ridiculous, or like fact to have like kind of a funny line. I think if the show was just like heavy, heavy, heavy all the time, people wouldn't feel maybe as endeared to the characters, or might not relate to it as much, because, real life is filled with all sorts of different emotions of stressful things. And then somebody relieves the tension, and then you're back to being stressed about something, or maybe something sad, but you find comfort by someone's, kind of like quick remark. So I think trying to make it just feel like other people's experiences is hopefully what makes people connect to the show so much.
there's a literary concept called bathos. I don't know if you know about it's kind of accidental humor in a serious moment where in literary work and in poems and in epic poems, there's this idea where we go to something trivial or foolish in a moment of kind of tension, kind of almost somewhat like a comic relief, but kind of more so just a kind of a step out of the drama for a second to have something ridiculous happen. That happens clearly, obviously, in The Bear, and I think those comedic moments really shine really well because something serious will be happening, and then fact will come in and do something ridiculous and pointless and transition out of the scene. Is that a challenge to handle in terms of when to do that and when to know when it's not overkill and it's not going to ruin the mood of the scene and the emotion of the scene? Because it's handled extremely well, but I know it's a delicate balance to try to hit those marks without kind of going too far.
I feel like very rarely, I actually can't think of like any moment where we were like, oh, this is too funny, let's like take it out. Like I feel like we usually lean into things because I think the show naturally leans towards being more stressful. So I feel like a lot of times those comedic moments are more welcome. Can you think of any good examples of that, Adam?
I'm trying to think. I agree. I don't think there's been a moment where they're like, that's a little too silly. Yeah, I feel like I mean, a lot of people have said like, it's not a comedy, but I feel like we're always trying to like get it not to be like funnier, but I guess to just be the more kind of true to a human experience it is. I think that just innately then makes it funnier because just everything when you kind of zoom out a little like far enough is pretty silly and ridiculous, like on a cosmic level. So I think like the moments that people react to are those kind of slices of just people being people. Like you were saying, at moments of seriousness in real life, there's oftentimes something that either breaks the ice, at a funeral and someone burps by accident or whatever, and like everyone's sad, but that's funny. And I think it's just a reminder of just like one's humanity to an extent. So I think the more of that we inject in, or the more that like, our extremely talented writers put in that and the way that the performers, carry that across, I think we try to probably lean into it more than pull it out, I'd say.
Yeah, and one other example is the Christmas episode. There was all the scenes with the Fack brothers pitching their like horrible business idea to everybody. That was all stuff that wasn't originally scripted, and I think when they were on set, Chris was rightly like, people are going to have a heart attack if we don't have some moments of levity. So that was something also that they were like, okay, we're going to give, Ricky and Maddie kind of like this idea and then let them run with it kind of with these, other actors. And so that wasn't stuff that was specifically scripted, but we knew we wanted to kind of inject these moments of humor without giving so much relief that we're like eliminating all this great tension that we're building, but also being like, oh yeah, at a family gathering, it can be suffocating and it can be stressful, but also we have that one goofy cousin who's always like coming up with their scheme. Like I think that's also something that people can relate to without completely taking away from the drama that we're like so intentionally building as well.
I want to talk about this scene from season 2 episode 8, this which I love, the from the episode Bolognese, which is the fire suppression test, because you do this, the production crew does this slow kind of pan to each character, and they each have an investment into this moment. They each have this fire suppression test. They've basically sunk in their entire career on whether this fire suppression test is going to moment. And so there's a series of, what's going on in their head as a series of flashbacks of their entire life leading to this moment. Can you talk about this before we show this a little bit?
Yeah, Megan and I actually got to co-edit this episode together, so it was so fun passing it back and forth. But I feel like you were doing a lot of the passes of the first like fire suppression as we were figuring it out, right, Meg?
Yeah, definitely. This scene, even though it is like the crux of the episode, there wasn't a ton of coverage of it. We kind of had that one panning shot of everybody, a couple close-ups of Carmie and a couple like close-ups of the inspector. And yeah, there wasn't a ton to work with, but I feel like the pacing was going well. We got the sound effects in there. And then once we showed the first cut to Chris, he had an idea about why don't we add in Carmie like looking at the burners of the stove and then like there's fire. And so we immediately thought of episode 108, the finale of the first season, where Carmie's in the kitchen of the beef and the stove catches on fire and he's just kind of standing there in a trance, thinking about burning the whole place down. And so we went back to that footage and were able to grab like a pretty good match cut of the stove just going up in flames and seeing the fire on Carmie's face. And then once we kind of dove into that world of using flashbacks, Chris was just kind of like, this is great, let's build it up more and more.
I'm grateful for all y'all, my friend.
6.
You can be such a cute dad.
5. 4. 3. 2. Says here the Chief Operating Officer is Natalie Berzato.
Correct, I am Natalie Berzato.
Congrats, Natalie Berzato. You have a restaurant.
It was so fun to kind of think outside the box and be like, how can we like elongate the scene? Because I feel like that was one of the notes that Megan and I kept getting to, was like, let's make it longer, and we were like, well, it's not very exciting to just watch a balloon not inflate, like the actual visual of what is happening for the scene, even though it's so important to the season, is kind of anticlimactic. So I remember like once Chris was like, oh, let's lead into the flashbacks even more, like Meg and I kind of like made a list of like, okay, what are all the things that like everyone could be thinking of in this moment? Like Chris gave us some ideas to start with too. And then we were like, oh, maybe this. And it was just really fun to kind of like go back and like think about what those little moments would be to kind of put us right into the character's head. And having this kind of like music too of like, okay, it's hopeful, but it's a little bit suspenseful. And JQ, our composer for that track, just like, I think he did so many different versions, and I'm so happy with where we landed because it was great.
JQ really pulled through with that one. I feel like in the end it was kind of a mixture of 2 different tracks that he had like written and composed, because there are kind of like 2 tones happening there. And we did actually think of some moments for Fack of what he would be thinking of, but in the end it was just like, it should just be like pop pop pop, just like he's just focusing on this, and like let's kind of shock everyone with some loud pops for a second and just think like, wow, what if it does pop?
So in terms of this episode, this was transitioning from assistant editor to becoming an editor, Megan. And so how does that decision get made, or more so, how does that growth and development get made? At what point does it feel like, hey, I would like to have an editing credit on this, or how do you work that out?
Yeah, I think for me and for this show and this context, it was a few different things. Like Joanna said, I've been working on it with her since the pilot. So I do have a pretty deep knowledge of the show and the world and the characters. And the scheduling of season 2 really worked in my favor, that we were doing the same schedule as season 1 with 3 more episodes. And so it was just kind of like a time crunch, and Joanna or Adam would be like, hey, could you do an assembly of this scene in your spare time? Just because like we're really falling behind on this episode and we just want to make sure things keep moving. And I think by the time Joanna got around to like being able to focus on 208, I had cut a whole bunch of it. And so then it was like, all right, let's collaborate on this. And it was a really amazing opportunity. I really feel like I got to express my love for all these characters and my like understanding of them. I really love the world of the bear, so it was really, really cool to be able to like show that in editing.
There's a really fast turnaround in these too, aren't there? These episodes, when they come from production, you guys are pretty quick on getting them kind of at least a first draft out.
Yeah, we try to stay, as up to camera as possible. Those first drafts are never going to be, usually things will change a fair amount, to put it mildly, but just to have something as quick as possible to react to, because, then you can actually kind of note something and improve versus having a first, perfect, pristine thing, which you're then probably going to, tear apart as it is. But yeah, the show in general moves pretty fast. Like season 2, the entirety of production and all of post was done within like 4 months, basically, for 10 episodes, one of them being, an hour long. Yeah, but a testament to good people who work together and, have a shorthand and don't overthink too much, which is great.
Yeah, and the other good thing about being able to cut while they're still in Chicago is there were times where we would send kind of an editor's cut or even do like 1 or 2 rounds, and then Chris and Josh and Joanna and everyone on set was like, oh, you know what? Maybe we should pick up like a little extra scene here to like add in, or maybe we should, I feel like we're losing this thread, or, they're so good about getting the coverage that we need, but it does, I think, enable, because we're primarily on one location in the restaurant, to be able to pick up anything else that maybe we might have missed or want to emphasize. So I think it would be really intimidating to be like, okay, we wrap production, here's all the footage start. So
Oof, no
that's
way.
like my palms start sweating just thinking about that. So being able to just be like, okay, we're just keeping up with production, we're just going with every day, was a way, I think, for everyone to just feel more confident about like, we have what we need, everything's coming together well, and then doing those little pickups if we need to along the way. But even that is pretty rare.
It is a great way to like set producers or directors' minds at ease a little bit too, because they have 100 million things that they're thinking about and are stressed about. So if you can show them a quick construction of something that they'd put a lot of work into, or was a hard shot to get, and be like, all right, here's just a sequence of 3 shots, and look, they flow great, and with the sound here's gonna be great. They're like, oh, I don't have to worry about that anymore, even in the back of my head, and let's move on to the next thing. Yeah, it's supporting everything.
In terms of what you're talking about, I'm always curious about when working in post on a show like this, how much foreknowledge you have for the rest of the season. As seasons or episodes being completed, you're right into the editing of those episodes. But do you know what the season finale is going to be, or how that's going to work out? How far along do you look into that? One of the reasons I'm asking, because I think about the character of Richie. Richie, in the first couple episodes of season 1, I remember texting my friend and saying, so this show is just about how Richie is awful. Okay, got it. This show's about Richie. And my friend, who had already seen the second season, said, no, give Richie a chance. And I was determined, I'm not giving Richie a chance. I don't like him. He's not, there's no redemption. And I fell in love with him. And now you somehow managed to redeem him. But do you go into that knowing that he's going to get redeemed later?
I mean, we didn't have the season 2 scripts when we were cutting season 1, but something must be wrong with the 3 of us, because we've always loved Richie from the beginning. We were like big Richie fans over here. So maybe we just saw his potential when nobody else could, or we just love Eben, the actor. But at the beginning of the season, we get all of the scripts. Adam edited Forks from, episode 207, which was kind of Richie's, big transformation. And I was just so excited to see how it came together. And like, that episode always brings me to tears. You did such a great job with it, Adam. And we love Richie. Yeah. I mean, you can talk about more about the actual work you did, but I'm like, it turned out great. That's all you need to know.
On like a character like Richie specifically, I think, we're closer to the material and closer to the scripts. So I understood why people didn't like him immediately. I loved him because I thought he was incredibly misunderstood, and his kind of asshole nature that wasn't like him, innately. That was a defense mechanism because he was so damaged and so hurt and was flailing, and, all of his anchors in the world were basically gone. So he was, kind of lashing out, understandably to an extent. I also think he's just like incredibly funny, and it's like sneaky smart in a way that people didn't necessarily understand right off the bat. In the pilot, the thing he gives thanks for is Philip K. Dick. So this isn't like a dum-dum who's just like some bro-y Chicago guy. But yeah, we know where things are going. So I think that, probably, I guess subconsciously maybe frames how we approach building earlier things, knowing where they're eventually going to go. But yeah, I mean, again, it's the actors and writers are so good as far as crafting an arc. It's, you know, trying to just support what they've put out there and the performances that they give, because they know where things are going to, obviously. And just kind of, you know, lean into what they're giving us.
Well, I think that's a great segue, so we can take a look at the Forks episode, which again, I think, yeah, as you said, Joanna, brings me to tears. It is, man, yeah, it's definitely my favorite episode. So if we can see this scene from Forks.
What are you making?
I'm just peeling mushrooms for the lamb de tournelle.
Peeling mushrooms.
Yeah, it's just a nice little fun detail, so when the diners see it, they know that someone spent a lot of time on their dish. Do you want to have a go?
Right.
Okay, so hold it like this.
Mm-hmm.
Knife 1300. Grab the end and just peel, like that. Just go slowly. Yeah.
1300, huh?
Yeah,
Do you serve?
Dad did.
Yeah, same. Staff sergeant.
Corporal.
A lot of standards.
Yeah. Turns out I like standards.
Talk to me a little bit about this scene, about why this scene was important to you. It is, I think, kind of it's a very subtle climax to this season, to this episode. It's not, you know, heavy-handed. It's just a kind of a quiet moment.
This was the last thing they shot for this episode, so we had pretty much the majority, everything else pretty much, you know, done to an extent, and knowing that this was coming, so knowing that this was going to be, like you're saying, it is technically the climax. It's funny to have such a quiet, you know, subtle climax, but you know, it's coming right after a point where he had just had all this growth and this triumph and this catharsis. And then he very quickly, when he realizes that he's not going to be in this place that he had this development before, he very quickly kind of reverts back to, not, you know, now I'm full Richie again and this meant nothing, but gets back to being defensive, gets back to, you know, thinking, this was just a fluke and this maybe isn't me. So knowing that we're going to have Olivia Colman, you know, be able to have this kind of, you know, Yoda Zen Buddha sort of moment of actually like really these things that he was thinking and feeling is really going to kind of really get it in him, basically. And now, you know, not that he's a changed person, but or someone who found his purpose. I think he's now someone who understands that he is ready to actively like search, like actively like grab purpose, as opposed to like, you're going to be the best, you know, expediter at a restaurant. It's like, you are now someone who actively wants to better himself. And I think that was the thing. And just, you know, from a technical perspective, because it was such a like a quiet, peaceful scene, I was really focused on kind of micro movements in the actors' faces, little flexes of eyebrows, seeing him, you know, again, this is a testament to great acting, you know, internalizing things, having moments of like slight confusion or like a small joke to himself. And then the same thing on the other side with Olivia Colman. And you know, this is someone who's at the top of her profession and, you know, is an extremely powerful individual, but showing some sides of her that bring a little bit of kind of lightness, a little, maybe see some more smiles than you might expect, to try to impart like this balance between, you know, authority, wisdom, but also humanity, ideally. And she's just, you know, she's Olivia Colman, which makes it a lot easier to just so good at what she does. It was a treat.
The sigh at the end, the kind of his nodding sigh, I think says so much about how, and Eben is great in this, about how it resonates with him, with how it resonates with Richie. Richie doesn't have to say, you know what, you've said a lot to me, and that's really important, and I'm going to remember this forever. He just sighs, and he, you know, she says, you know, apparently standards are important to me, and he just goes, uh-huh. And that's enough. And that's just, that little moment is like, that just stabbed you in the heart, Richie. And you're not going to say it, but you can see it in just the smallest, tiny little emotional gesture.
Yeah. That's one last, that's just a testament to the writers, who I think do such a great way of imparting meaning and subtext. I feel like we're living in an age of kind of gross literalism right now, that everyone needs a hand holding as far as like, well, what did that mean? And who's he and who said that and like why? And they do a great job of like not spelling things out in the most, here's exactly what I mean by this, but in a way that feels natural and still brings, all of that meaning forward.
You don't say things, and you don't show things, and you don't, like, as you said, Adam, you don't tell things literally as they are, and don't give away all the clues. You let the audience kind of decipher the clues. I think there's a number of scenes with Marcus, and his relationship with Sydney that are subtly suggested, but nothing's overt. Is that a challenge to handle, or is it a joy to play with in terms of, deciding not to say something or to pull away from something?
Yeah, I mean, I guess with that scene specifically, that Copenhagen episode, Adam and I got to edit together, which was so fun. But that was never scripted. It wasn't like a choice that we made to not include, who he's specifically referencing. I think that was a really bold choice on behalf of the writers to be like, we're going to make this clear without having to spell it out. And then in Forks, Richie's walking down the hallway and sees a photo of Luca and Carmie together, which is kind of like, I think, our such a subtle way of just being like, oh yes, in case you had any doubts, like they were here and they were here together, and puts, I think, makes the restaurant feel like an even more kind of magical place where all these people have come together in the past. But yeah, I mean, I think even when we were cutting the pilot, there was like a lot more exposition in the opening, and Chris was like very, very smart in the way that he was like, let's trust the audience. Let's give them just enough to like get what they need, but also have people like lean in. Like, I think one of the best compliments that we can get from people who watch the show are like, oh, like I haven't watched your show yet because I know I really need to focus on it. Like, I can't just like be on my phone while watching it. And I'm like, great. Like, we don't want to be like, a secondary screen. We want people to like lean in and be like, yes, I'm putting things together. And, we don't like even take the time to really explain what a lot of the lingo is in the kitchen. I think people just pick it up by hearing it over and over again and using those context clues. So I think, anytime we can not spell things out in a way that kind of asks the audience to take like one step closer to taking in all the information, just makes for a more kind of like rewarding and engaging experience for everybody.
How much freedom are you given in terms of changing the story or adapting the story? I know that sometimes showrunners are very kind of overbearing about how the show is structured and to not deviate from any ideas. But are there new ideas that you bring to the table, and how much liberty do you have with that?
Yeah, I mean, Chris is an exceptionally trusting collaborator, very open to experimentation, is not kind of like sitting over our shoulder being like, this is exactly how it was written, or like, make this 2 frames shorter, or like, Adam and Megan and I have talked about this before. Like, Chris is such an emotion-driven director and showrunner, which I love as an editor, because he's like, okay, this scene we should make sure Sydney feels like the loneliest person in the world. How do we get there? And I'm like, oh, that's such a fun puzzle to figure out. We can use music. We could use cross dissolves. We could use a flashback. We could use this. Like, what are all the things I have in my editing toolkit that I can do with that? So I feel like our first cuts are usually pretty close to the script. And then after that, it's very much a conversation of like, oh, actually, this scene should go in this episode. Or what if we intercut this scene? What if we build out a montage here? Like, I'd say like half the montages are probably scripted, or at least like referenced in the script, but a lot of times that's some stuff that like Chris will just pitch to us, or we'll bring to him and be like, I feel like this is a moment where we can like get inside Carmie's head a little bit more. So I think it takes a really confident and really like talented, showrunner, director, producer to be able to be like, I'm so confident in the material that like, I'm going to trust that the ideas that the other people are bringing to the table are going to just make it even better, and not cling to the first thing that they wrote, see the footage for what it really is, and let it kind of, be the best version it can be, even that's different than how it was originally envisioned.
Yeah, definitely. They're not in the best way, extremely precious about what's on the page if it isn't working, or if they think that there's a better way to get around it, which is great, because some people have have a really hard time of this is the Bible and we're not going to stray from that, and that's going to be tough. But we've had like the end of episode 3 in season 1, none of that was scripted. That was entirely like came out of whole cloth. We didn't like how the original ending was, so pick a track, repurpose some B-roll, grab some, shot or some audio of Sydney calling out orders, take a different shot from a different episode of Carmie looking at a phone, use that with a comp, and then reuse, another take of the opening scene to kind of bookend it. Like, and none of that's on the page. But that's that's just a testament to them being open and willing to experiment to, to get it to make it the best version of what it is, even if that wasn't written. So yeah, so it's a combination of great writing and then also like the flexibility and the willingness, which is a really cool combination.
Yeah, and you can kind of tell that like the flexibility and collaboration starts on the set too, because we'll have so many takes that are just like at the end they'll just improvise and go off into something different, or like immediately the line that's on the page has been changed to something that's just like more natural for the actors to say. Like everyone's definitely like making it feel as genuine as possible as soon as they start shooting. So then once you get to like the cutting room, it's like they're already ready to change things around and just they want it to be as genuine and well working as possible.
Adam, Joanna, you both mentioned the idea of working with montages. I think this show has become kind of extremely well known for the intense, rapid montages that are telling the stories. Is this something that you enjoy, or is this something that Chris brought to the table that you wanted? I feel like there's some episodes that just feel like an ongoing series of montages that are just there. How do you approach it, and is it exciting for you when you say, "Oh, another montage we get to cut together really fast and really hurt people's hearts"? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think montages are so fun. I mean, I love cutting to music. I love like trying to be as efficient as possible. I think that's just like my natural taste is I like kind of like fast-paced things. And kind of like the first montage in the series is the one kind of I keep referencing. It's like, yeah, Carmie doing all these different things at once. That was originally scripted as like 8 different scenes and it was running about 12 minutes long. It felt like a really kind of slow intro to Carmie's world. And Chris was like, okay, we got a good 12 minutes here. What if we did it in 3? And I was like, oh, all right, let's try it. And it was 100% the right call. And it was intimidating at first, but like it was such a fun exercise to be like, again, kind of like what we were talking about, let's give just enough information and kind of layer it and show that like all these things are overlapping and happening at once, which is such a reflection of where Carmie is. He's juggling a million different things. His attention is constantly divided between lots of different, aspects of running this business, and also starting from a place of absolute chaos so that we could build to, these moments of, okay, things are starting to coalesce. People are communicating better. Maybe they're going to be able to pull off this restaurant. So I always get excited when I see a montage in the script, or when, I think occasionally, we'll in our edit be like, I think this is an opportunity for a montage. I feel like sometimes we'll have scenes that we realize will be better intercut and we make it into like a little bit of a montage. Like we have an example of that in 208, where there's like a scene where Carmie and Fack are in the walk-in and they're talking about Claire, and he's like, oh, is she my girlfriend? And Fack's like, I don't know, like, what is a girlfriend? And that was just filmed as like a one take, and it wasn't bad. It just felt very slow compared to, the pace that we had set. So Megan and I were like, okay, we have these other great scenes before and after. What if we use this as like a tent pole that we keep coming back to? So we'd be in the walk-in, then we'd see Tina and Richie, then we'd go back to the walk-in for this conversation, then we'd see, like Sugar and, and Sweeps doing something, and then we go back to the walk-in. So that was a way to kind of like intercut and make a little bit of a montage showing like the ensemble cast and keep things moving. So we definitely have some epic montages, and sometimes they're a little bit more subtle, and it's almost like an in-between of like a scene versus a montage. And it's kind of fun figuring out how crazy do we want to make things in this moment, and that'll determine how fast we cut, all the different things we're pulling from, and kind of go from there.
I think this brings up I want to come to this montage, the scene from episode 203, where Sydney is researching restaurants.
Known to be the neighborhood diner people counted on for the past 7 decades, is closing its doors for good.
Yesterday, the restaurant made the announcement that it would be closing permanently.
Everybody loves the food. They love the service. They love this restaurant
that people could always count.
For the many employees that have worked at the restaurant for decades, the news came as a devastating story.
How was having seen this again after not seeing it in a while? How was this?
Yeah, it's so funny because this was one of the later things that we added to the episode. This wasn't originally scripted. There's supposed to be a different opening. It was supposed to start with or actually, I don't know if it's the very beginning of the episode. We might have Alan on first for Carmie, but regardless, it wasn't scripted originally. It was something we came up with, or Chris came up with later. Do you remember when they filmed that stuff, Meg, with Sid? Did we have that first, or did they go back and film it? I'm trying to remember.
They went back and filmed that. I think there were some other images of her eyes that were used elsewhere that we were like, can we repurpose this? But they were like, we can actually just grab these shots real quick and we'll get her closing the laptop. But yeah, this was completely fabricated and they had to go back and shoot that.
Yeah, so we were basically doing like screen grabs originally as we were just temping stuff to see if it worked. And I was talking to Josh Sr., one of the EPs, and he was like, what if it's like a kind of the overall idea? She's like looking through Google Maps and like seeing or Apple Maps and seeing all the different things that have closed. And we can kind of emphasize, how hard it is to start a business. Like I think going back to what we were saying before, this is one of those moments that if we hadn't been cutting while they were still shooting, we probably wouldn't have gone back just to get this one reshoot with Io. But as the episodes were coming together, Chris and Josh and Joanna were like, oh, well, I think we are losing this idea of like, it's so hard to have a successful business, especially after the pandemic, especially in a city in Chicago where rent is so high. So this was kind of their answer to be like, let's make sure we're emphasizing how much is on the line and how stressed Sydney is. And maybe that's affecting the other aspects of her life as she's trying to come up with a menu, as she's kind of deciding to take this plunge. Also thinking about, we know she's had a failed business before. Her Sheridan Road catering company did not succeed. So I think adding, especially to her, this feeling of like things are all going to fall apart also kind of started us off on this wedge between where Carmie's at in season 2 and Sydney. Sydney is like all in on the restaurant. She's so stressed about it. Whereas Carmie is kind of having this, love affair and, falling in love with Claire, which he needs for sure. Like all for Carmie getting out of the kitchen. But I think it just shows how these two characters are kind of like their priorities are splitting a little bit. So yeah, this was something that was made like basically entirely in the edit of just trying to get inside Sydney's head, showing her kind of scrolling through all these different things. Again, a beautiful track from JQ, our composer, to kind of add to this stress and using, I basically just found these beats and that could feel like the click, click, click as she's like going through. And I think everyone has that. I assume everyone has doom scrolled before and being like, oh, this isn't making me feel better, but I can't stop. So that was what we were supposed to feel in this moment. It's just like a little bit of a car crash, like Sydney can't look away. And that's a theme we return to, in the series as well. She goes and visits a bunch of different chefs later in this episode. And then later in maybe episode 5 or something like that, episode 9, she goes back and sees one of the restaurants has closed. So I think that was really just like a theme that we knew was referenced in the script, but by adding this to the beginning of episode 3, it really just emphasized it and made sure we understood that this big undertaking they're setting off on, there's no guarantee it will succeed. So many have failed before them. And just really, add to the stakes of what they were embarking on.
Character of Carmie is a series of red flags. He's a series of probably someone he's brilliant but tortured, has a bad family life, is emotionally unavailable, is not in a good place to be in a relationship. He's everything you probably should stay away from in terms of relationship. And yet it's charming because he's brilliant and he's tortured and he's, the closest thing to a rock musician a chef can be. And so is that something that you lean into in the editing, or is that something that you were expecting in the editing, that he was going to be this character that like I have, friends of mine who want to date him now, and not even the actor, just the character. Is that something that you considered as you make these decisions, or how do you approach his headspace?
I don't think that was ever like a real, at least on mine, like a conscious thing that influenced the construction of things. I think, maybe one of the things that have helped gin up some of those feelings for someone who is obviously like, there are a lot of red flags, is Jeremy and everyone in the show, their ability to hold a close-up, which is not, you can either do that or you can't. And everyone in this show, the camera can be right on their face, 3 inches away, basically. And it's extremely captivating. And, if you have blue eyes that almost like look fake, they're so bright, I think that is very captivating as well. So I think, potentially kind of leaning into that, but just because more that's a compelling visual thing. But I just think I don't think that was, anything that kind of influenced the way that things were put together. I just think he's such a great actor. Like you said, everything you're saying as far as red flags, I feel like those are all like the classic kind of, you're going for someone that's a bad idea, but that's oftentimes like extremely, intriguing or attractive as well. So that makes sense. Yeah, pretty people on TV. It's a powerful thing.
Yeah, I think he plays the character so well, and even though on paper he has a ton of red flags, he just like really plays up those softer moments really well and like really humanizes him, that you see that there is a lot of good in Carmie despite all of his issues, and that makes him attractive to many.
In terms of Carmie's kind of development, what I think is really interesting is you do this with many characters, but you do this a lot with Carmie's kind of psyche. In the back of his head, it's Carmie blinks, and then a series of montages of all the things going on in Carmie's mind and all the people who are yelling at Carmie simultaneously, and all the trauma and tragedy, whether it be family or whether it be past restaurants he's worked at. There's these moments and these kind of intense, overwhelming montages that happen. How does that manifest, or how does that come about in terms of from page to edit?
Going back to what we said before, sometimes it's scripted, and there's a very intense montage that happens in the finale of season 1, and that was like literally a bunch of those images were written out in the script of he's thinking of this chef's recipe and this color and blah 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 blah. And then sometimes it's something that is kind of come up with in the edit. Is it episode 209 where you have the kind of meltdown at the beginning of that with that big push-in shot
when he's in the alley?
Yeah, was that something that was always scripted, or is
that was like a half and half? It basically scripted in the sense that like Carmie has a panic attack, is I haven't read the script in a while, but is like thinking about this that happened, thinking about this that happened, and then the way that they cover him, you can use his like the hands flexing to then go to another shot of him in a stressful moment, with hands, or popping out. He turns his head, and then you're flashed back to something from the Christmas episode. But one of the cool things about like a montage like that is it's especially with like Chris and Josh and Joanna, it's an evolving sort of process. So we'll be at a place where like, oh, it's feeling good, and then they'll be like, oh, it would also be cool that we haven't shot, that we don't have. We can get these drawings that he did of Claire, because we've seen allusion to the fact that he's a really good artist and illustrator, and they've mentioned that he kind of liked her as a kid. So we'll get these quick flashes of these sketches that he did when they were younger, to kind of another layer to this. And then it'll be a discussion, and they'll say like, okay, well, now let's bring in Sid, and the kind of the tenor of the thing will change. So that wasn't scripted as directly. It's something that is a place, not a placeholder, an idea that's going to happen, and then through the edit and through ideas that the creators have or that we come up with, it'll kind of be an evolving document.
Yeah, and another kind of example is in the finale for season 2 when Carmie's trapped in the fridge. This was actually a note we got from FX that was so smart, was adding in like, what if Carmie's imagining what's going on outside of the fridge, because he can't tell what's going on, he can only hear it. And so we kind of created this idea of like, what are all like the worst possible things basically that could be happening, and flashing to that while he's trapped in the walk-in. And we actually used some footage we originally shot for the pilot but didn't make it into the episode, of him like throwing this vat of like sauce against the wall, and kind of losing his cool, which we decided didn't really fit in the pilot but was this great footage, and we all loved it. So that was something that we were like, oh yeah, this was never really scripted, but just as a way to like intensify how we're feeling. Carmie's obviously very removed from everyone, being trapped in the walk-in, but this is a way to get inside his head and just keeping us connected to our protagonist and main character, based on the footage we already have access to.
You talked about this idea, and I think the Fishes episode is really just as entire flashback episode. It's just a pinnacle of the story that you're telling, because it tells so much, and it delivers so much in terms of building these characters, and what, like, you knew there was trauma and you knew there was some issues, but this kind of does it. And you do this at the climactic scene with a series of reaction shots that we're going to show next. I think this works really well because what I like about it is I've watched it a couple times, and as an audience, as a viewer, what I want to see next is what I see next in every moment. Like it just like psychologically for me, the next shot that I want to see, okay, no, I want to see this right now. It's like, and then you go to it. It's like you tapped into my head and then found exactly the next shot that I want to see following this shot. So it's this reaction. Then I'm like, but no, I want to see what Natalie's doing. Wait, no, okay, we got Natalie. Now I want to see this now. And I'm like, I'm directing from my couch in my living room, watching this after it's already been created.
Fat. Using your fork. Yeah, I need it, Mike. Okay. I need it. Please, Mikey. Yeah? Yeah. I need to borrow it. Please. I just need to borrow it for 1 second. Mikey, please. Hey, Lee. Michael. I'm just gonna borrow it for a second. I just need it for 1 second. Come on, dude. Yo.
Michael. Hey, Michael.
I threw the fork, Lee.
Michael.
See what I did? I threw the fork. Tiff.
Please.
Shh. Oh, hey, cousin. No. You're scaring the normals. This is fine. This is nothing. It's nothing.
Hey, Mikey, can you hear me, buddy?
Not right now, Stevie. Cut it out. Rich? Hey, look, here's the thing. You see, I can throw forks, because this is our father's house. Mike, right? Rich, Lee. My father's house.
We have liftoff.
So tell me your thoughts about this scene.
Yeah, I mean, we knew that this big dinner sequence was going to be important, since it's what this whole, when Chris described the episode to me, he was like, it should feel like a pot of water that's boiling. And then at the end, it just starts overflowing. So we're just like the simmer that's slowly getting more and more tumultuous. And, everything is very stationary in that last scene. Everyone's just sitting at the table, but I really wanted to feel alive. And so I revisited for inspiration one of my favorite shows, Fleabag, and the first episode of season 2 takes place primarily around a table in a restaurant. They go out for a smoke break, they go to the bathroom a couple times, but for the most part, everyone's sitting around the table. Another incredible Olivia Colman performance in that episode. She's so good. But the way that I think they kept things feeling so tense and so alive, even though everyone was stationary, is by using reaction shots. And a lot of times you're not even hearing people say their whole line. You start to hear it and we're already going to see, how is somebody else reacting to this? How is somebody else reacting to their reaction? So this is just trying to line up, kind of as you were saying, Chad, kind of like if you were sitting at the table, like trapped in this, this situation that's spiraling out of control. Maybe you're looking and you're seeing Natalie, and Natalie's trying to make eye contact with Carmie. Carmie can't even look at her because he's so stressed. Richie's kind of laughing. He's enjoying it, but you see, Pete, he's mortified. So I think I just wanted to feel like you were at that empty seat at the table and kind of clocking how everybody is reacting to each other, because this is an incident that they've probably seen play out several times. They know that Mikey can be a hothead. They know that Uncle Lee can be a jerk, and everyone's just trying to control something that is, quickly spiraling out of their control. So yeah, as we were putting it together, we really just wanted it to feel like quick cuts. Everyone's looking around the table. And then if we keep going in the scene, then Donna enters. And then it's like, a whole nother level of tension takes over when she's at the table as well. So it was just really fun to keep building and building and feel like, okay, maybe this is the climax. All right, maybe this is the climax. Nope, it's the car crashing through the house is the climax. So just continuing to kind of like amp that up every step of the way.
One of the things I think about when watching that episode is with the level of intensity of that episode. I just watched it again recently, and I've never been a fan of commercial breaks, but watching it on Hulu, there's a point at which there's a commercial break, and I can exhale for like 35 seconds before going into the. I'm like, this. It's a, I can't imagine what seeing the episode without a commercial break would have done to the ever increasing gray hair that I'm growing. It's a lot. It's heavy and it's a lot, and it's traumatic. It's handled really, really well.
Yeah, and something that's so fun about that episode is that Carmie and Richie almost become background characters. Like everybody else is so loud in their family, and the only way that we've seen Carmie and Richie try to resolve conflict in the past in the show is by screaming at each other, and it feels so immature and it feels so frustrating. And then you see this episode and it's like, oh, that's all they've ever known. Like these are the models that they've had to look up to of the way to communicate, and also in a messed up way, a way to express love. Like I think all these people in the room really do love each other, even though they drive each other insane insane. So that's just their way of kind of expressing themselves. So it was cool to be able to let Carmie and Richie almost take a little bit of a backseat, see how everybody else is interacting. And then now that we know Richie and Carmie so well from the other episodes, how we empathize even more with the people they are today and how they choose to, interact with the people around them.
It's interesting to say that because, for most of this series, there really is no villain. There really is a series of characters who are interwoven, who have complicated lives, who have backstories, who have trauma, who have these circumstances. Is it? I think it might be more challenging to craft these episodes, knowing that the climax isn't frequently, a good person wearing a white hat versus a bad person wearing a black hat, kind of, good versus evil kind of mentality. It's just people with a lot of personalities. Is that something that you try to work with, or how do you balance that?
I think that the villain might be a bit of a reductive way to talk about, but I think the universal kind of thing that they're constantly going against is the realities of time and money and just survival, and that is in every episode, and that is the driving force behind all of it. Obviously the relationships and the understanding that they try to find with each other and the evolution on that is a massive part of it as well. And Richie trying to fix himself, and Sid trying to be good with her father and carve her own path. So all the interpersonal stuff, but the thing that's kind of floats above all of it, the second season, the theme from the get-go is every second counts. And that was our directive basically from day one. And I think that's something that everyone can relate to, no matter what station in life you're in. You always want to either get to like the next step, but once you get to that success, you then have to maintain that. So success can become a prison, and time never stops, and there's always a need for more money. So I think that feeling was ever present, and so I think we were thinking about that as far as what's the driving the villain. The villain is life, super deep.
Yeah.
Or late stage capitalism, one of the two.
So this is the point in the interview where it's time for you to confess that everything is going to happen in season 3 and give all the spoilers about the every detail, so that we know everything going forward. Nothing, no, I'm not going to do it.
We're locked vaults.
Good.
It's all animated. The whole season's animated. Sorry.
But your predictions were right. It's going great. It's going well.
Yeah. The last question I want to ask about is music in this. I, growing up as a young hardcore punk kid, fell in love with Refused as your kind of opening theme song. And once I heard that coming in the beginning of the episode, I'm like, okay, I'm watching the rest of this season. How do you handle music, whether it be temp music? You mentioned before, JW, your composer,
JQ, yeah.
JQ, I'm sorry, JQ as your composer coming in and composing music for you. There's a lot of stuff that's rhythmic about this editing. There's a lot of stuff that happens to a tempo, whether it be a visual tempo or a musical tempo. How do you approach the music underneath with the editing pacing? And is it something that going into it that you're going to have, or is it something that you kind of just work with as it goes?
Yeah, so at the beginning of every season, Chris and Josh are our music supervisors, so they determine the music. And a lot of the season, they'll give us a playlist that's like, here's the world of the bear. And sometimes it specifically says in the script, like season 2 will start with The Show Must Go On by Bruce Hornsby, so we know that from the beginning. Part of the time we'll be working in the edit and they'll be like, ooh, try this song here. We want to use The Crane Wife by the Decemberists in here. And then sometimes I think we just know we want to add music, but we're not sure exactly what. So that's when we'll either pitch our own musical ideas or choose something from the playlist. And the playlist is a great opportunity to be like, okay, at least we know they like these songs. Like it can be hard to be like, of all the music in the world. Taylor Swift was specifically mentioned in 207. Like sometimes there's a very clear idea. But I always try to make sure a scene is working more or less before I start adding in music, just because you want to make sure the pace is there, and then once I add in the track, then it's when I can get a little bit more to the beat, a little bit more like syncopated if we're doing something very montage driven. But yeah, we're blessed, we get to use some really fun songs in our show, including New Noise.
Yeah. And one of the things that you mentioned too, as far as kind of the specific, visual rhythm or audio rhythm of it, there's been a couple times, which is something that's unique to this show that I never really done before, where we'll be cutting a scene or a sequence to a track pretty much through like the entirety of its initial construction. And then we'll get kind of towards the end and they'll say, or there'll be, discussion about it and be like, let's lose the track entirely. But let's still keep that rhythm of cutting that was very specific to the track that we were playing with, but now it's just going to be, nat sound and that's going to be what kind of pulls us through. So you get this sort of a visual pattern that you probably wouldn't have landed on if you were just doing it from the get-go with no music, or if you had never kind of, made it fit more in with the track that we were using, which gives it a kind of a different pace and vibe. It's a cool technique.
Adam, was the omelet making scene one of those scenes?
Yeah, we had tried like 4 or 5 different tracks with that, and then the decision was made, and I think 100% the correct decision to lose the music and just let it be about the sound of the cooking and Sid's breath and just like hearing the sizzle and but that was we had like probably half a dozen songs in there at some point.
Well, let's take a look at that scene because we do have some time. So I do want to take a look at that scene. We do have that
Nice
scene.
segue.
Yeah, I know. It was really worked out for us. Really there. I wasn't sure we were going to get to it, but let's talk about it.
Yeah, I can make you an omelet. Yeah, go in the office.
Thank you.
What I really think is interesting, what I really love about that scene is it's almost not about making the omelet. It's about people taking care of each other and why they love what they do. And again, it's one of those moments where it says enough about what the driving force behind Sydney is, and without her overtly, as you said before, literally saying anything, and that gross literalism is kind of just a subtle moment of just, hey, this is a quiet moment there.
Yeah.
I think what's really interesting about this series, and we've talked about this before, but the idea that you have a lot of intense, and even in this episode, you have a lot of intense, fast-paced, heavy, overwhelming, kind of in-your-face moments, heavy montages, things, and then there'll be a break, and that break will be just a quiet second, whether it be Richie and Carmie smoking outside and just having a conversation in the middle of a war zone that's happening in the kitchen, or in this scene when they're prepping for anything, they take a short break for Sydney to make an omelet.
Yeah, I think anything where you can, give the viewer something where they're not feeling predictive and they don't feel that it's repetitive. I feel like if everything was just chaos at all times, it's not that it would be like too much. It would get boring after a while because you would know everything. You would know everything that's coming. The dynamic range, between scenes, I think is the thing that gives kind of strength to each side of the coin. You can't have the quiet without the loud and vice versa. And I think it also mirrors the rhythms of the kitchen in a very direct way, as you're saying, as far as going outside for a smoke break. So anything that we can do pace wise and with variation to kind of to mirror that experience of what a chef goes through, what a kitchen goes through, what a family goes through as far as chaos and calm and beauty. The more the better as far as that distinction.
Well, I want to thank all of you so much, Joanna, Adam, Megan. Thank you so much for joining us today on Sight, Sound, and Story.
Thanks for watching, everybody. Tonight's Sight, Sound, and Story Behind the Edit of The Bear. I'm Josh from Manhattan Edit Workshop, and I want to thank again AJA, ACE, American Cinema Editors, and Avid, and of course Janet Dalton and Jason Banke from Manhattan Edit Workshop, our panelists, our moderator. And please subscribe to our channel, like it if you like it, and you can always send us a message for stuff that you'd like to see in the future. We're always looking to do interesting things. And I just hope you enjoyed the show. Have a great night, everybody, and thank you for watching.
Probably one of the smartest things I've ever done for my career. It gave me all the tools that I needed to be able to jump into a new career. Getting myself into a mindset, thinking like an editor, being around people that I can talk to on that level was really invaluable to me.
A lot of the things that I learned from that class, I still think about.
I loved the classroom. I loved the computer stations. We built a sense of community.
And it also instills a lot of confidence in you to take that and go out into the world.
After I took the class, I felt very prepared to take the next step.
I owe Manhattan Workshop the career that I have right now. Things have been going great, and I really have the Manhattan Workshop to thank for that.